Huge changes happened overnight in FPL that will reshape your moves ahead of Game Week 24 and beyond. So with that in mind, what are we waiting for? Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to help get you set up for Game Week 24 and beyond. There were some huge changes in FPL last night that are going to affect the moves you're going to want to make. So in this video, we're going to hopefully try and answer all of those dilemmas. And what I've done this video is add some chapters in the video itself. So if you want to skip ahead or focus on one particular section, please feel free to do so using the chapters. To start off though, let's take a look at my Game Week 23 performance, as we always do. For me, it was a very small green arrow, saved mainly by Phil Foden coming in at the death with 20 points and his hat-trick. So that was fantastic to see. It meant that my arrow turned from a pretty deep shade of red to a minimal green, but I'm happy enough with 73 points. And importantly, I've got 2 free transfers going into Game Week 24, which all of a sudden, based on the information we've got, looks really, really helpful. Quick scan of my team shows that there were no points in goal or in defence. That is a problem, and there are players in there that I probably want to be concerned about, which we'll discuss in a moment's time. In midfield, all of them return somewhat, although Gordon is now flagged. Again, we'll discuss that in just a minute. And up front, Ollie Watkins with 18 points. I wasn't ever really considering him for captain personally, but any of you who did, please do let me know in the comments below, and you can gloat about that personally to me. That is absolutely fine. And again, let me know what points you scored in Game Week 23 in the comments as well. So the big breaking news that we're all talking about after last night's announcement is the fact that double Game Week 28 is going ahead. Bournemouth and Luton will both play 2 fixtures in Game Week 28, so just wanted to note that down for any of you that weren't already aware. That is going to be a pretty significant change to our transfer plans. Any of you that have already got Dominic Solanke or Luton players ahead of the double game week in 25 for Luton specifically will probably be licking your lips at this announcement. Although it is worth noting, with Luton in particular in mind, their double in 25 isn't fantastic. They then blank in 26, and then you'd have to hold them through to 28 as well. So it's not absolutely as simple as just pile on all of the Luton assets, but I think it is pretty safe to say that there'll be popular transfers in not only this week, but next, and then as we approach game week 28 as well. So if you've already got the likes of Alfie Doughty or Thomas Kaminski or even someone like Carlton Morris up front, you're probably feeling pretty good about life right now. Now, I think out of the 2 double game weeks here, Bournemouth definitely have the better double. So Sheffield United at home and Luton at home is about as good as it gets for a double game week. That is pretty much ideal for someone like Dominic Solanke. I think a lot of us will be bringing him in and prioritising him as a captaincy option in Game Week 28. It also makes it a much more difficult decision to sell him ahead of the next couple of game weeks. But I think it is worth noting that we've still got a fair few weeks to go before we hit double Game Week 28. There are other forwards that you'll probably want to prioritise before we get there. So I think if you're thinking of selling Solanke, it's absolutely fine for the time being. Just make sure you've got a plan to get back to him for Game Week 28, because we've only got a few transfers between here and then. So Solanke is going to be an important player to get back to. Just make sure you've got a plan to get there. In my list of priorities, I would put him at the top for double Game Week 28, followed closely by Alfie Doughty and then Thomas Kaminski, who I don't really expect too many clean sheets from, especially as both of those games in 28 are away from home. But having a goalkeeper that doubles twice in the space of just 4 game weeks is going to be highly beneficial. So I understand anyone who is thinking about making that goalkeeper switch this game week ahead of Sheffield United at home, then a double. Okay, there's a blank, but if you've got a second keeper, then that will be absolutely fine to cover off Game Week 26, and then another double in Game Week 28 as well. So just a quick update for you on double Game Week 28, and my initial thoughts there would be Solanke is the main priority. After that, Luton assets, maybe bringing in 1 or 2, looks pretty decent from now until double game week 28 as well. So the other big update we had overnight was that we have another blank game week 29 fixture confirmed to go ahead. Now, it wasn't the result that maybe a few of us were expecting. Aston Villa at home to Chelsea. I think based on Chelsea's recent form and the fact that Villa have been very good all season, we thought Aston Villa were more likely to go through. However, that was not the case. Chelsea have progressed through, and it now means that the Aston Villa versus West Ham game, West Ham at home in that match, will now definitely go ahead in game week 29. So if you've got Aston Villa players, if you've got West Ham players, they will be players that you can rely on in game week 29 not to have a blank. On the flip side, though, a lot more of us have Arsenal players and Chelsea players and a lot more coverage in those two teams in our FPL sides right now. Now, it is still possible that that fixture is also confirmed to go ahead in game week 29. Chelsea have now progressed through to the next round where they'll play Leeds United at home. Obviously, Chelsea will be favourites in that match to go through, but it wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility for Leeds to pull off an upset. They've been very good in the Championship so far this season. So it's not impossible that that game would go ahead in game week 29 if Chelsea were to get knocked out. However, I think it is on the unlikely side, and those of us with Arsenal or Chelsea players at the moment might need to start thinking about plans to get rid of them ahead of game week 29, and it might make them easier to sell in the next few game weeks. The other result that occurred last night is that Nottingham Forest went through on penalties against Bristol City, very marginally, of course, but it means that they'll be playing Man United in the next round of the FA Cup. The winner of that game will definitely have a blank game week confirmed in game week 29, but the loser, if it was Man United, would have their game go ahead because their opponents, Sheffield United, are already out. Now, what's really interesting about that result is that now, if Nottingham Forest and Luton both get knocked out of the FA Cup in the next round, both of which will be the underdogs in their respective fixtures against both Manchester clubs, then their fixture will also be going ahead in blank game week 29. Now, based on the news about Luton that we've just been through, if Luton have a game in 29, they'll have a double in 25, blank in 26, and then double in 28 and have a fixture in 29. So they could be a very important team to be thinking about over the next few game weeks if that game were to go ahead. Now, obviously, either Luton or Nottingham Forest could pull off a bit of an upset. You'd say Forest in particular are more likely to pull off the upset than Luton are. And that could mean that we don't get that game either. So it is one to monitor. However, the information we got from last night is that Arsenal and Chelsea assets might be slightly easier to sell. We can't rely on them in game week 29 as many of us might have expected to. But Aston Villa and West Ham, we can now rely on in game week 29. So maybe they're going to be easier holds than we first expected going into game week 29. So captaincy is going to be another big call yet again in game week 24, but looking at the matrix, as we always do, there is going to be a fairly clear favourite, and that will be Erling Haaland. The fixture against Everton on paper is a good one. I'll go into in a minute just why it might not be the ideal one, but the data and the returns and the points are all pointing towards Erling Haaland as far as the matrix is concerned. Kevin De Bruyne could be another City option you might take a look at. Phil Foden, obviously, after scoring a hat-trick, might not be bad either, although it is worth noting, I don't expect that to consistently happen from now on. Kevin De Bruyne obviously returned in each of his 3 matches since coming back from his injury, but I think he is ever so slightly less explosive than someone like Haaland, who is on penalties as well. So I think based on the fact he played 86 minutes in his first start back over game week 23, looks pretty likely he's set for another batch of good minutes in game week 24 as well. So I think primarily most people are going to be putting the hand on him. However, though, I think Everton will probably try to play that deep block like they did, or like Brentford did in game week 23. And Haaland can find himself marked out of games a little bit in those sort of situations. And it brings other City players into focus. So players like Foden or KDB might benefit from that, but Haaland might have a bit of his time taken up being man-marked by 2 players at once, making it ever so slightly more difficult for him to actually find the back of the net. However, it is at home. he is going to find spaces. He's an elite striker, so I would not back against him scoring against Everton at home, even if they do double up on him. So I still think he's going to be a great captaincy option. After that, I think there are two other fixtures you could potentially look at targeting. One would be Liverpool at home to Burnley. I don't really have a preference out of Darwin or Jota, which one I prefer as a captaincy option. I think if Darwin keeps penalties, I probably would prefer him based on that and the fact that his data is significantly better, but we know how frustrating and wasteful he can be as a striker. So I think the safer of the two options is probably going to be Diogo Jota. Now, if you want to chase upside, Darwin is probably your man, but Jota feels like just a slightly safer pick there, and we know that he's been a really clinical finisher in very good form recently for Liverpool. Outside of any of those options, I think my next favourite would be Richarlison at home to Brighton. We know that those fixtures, any fixture involving Spurs is full of goals at the moment, and Brighton have a very similar kind of mentality as well. So I do expect plenty of chances for Richarlison in that game, and Heung-min Son will be back most likely from the Asia Cup as well, so that just strengthens Spurs. They'll create even more chances, and Richarlison could really benefit from that, so I don't hate him as a differential captaincy shout either. All five of these would be very, very good picks. I personally just about favour Erling Haaland at the moment. So a bit of a new section for me today, and I'm going to have a look at my top 5 transfer targets from this week and every week moving forwards from now on. So hopefully this section is enjoyable and informative for you. So this will be based on my team in particular, and the first player at the top of my transfer targets at the moment is Diogo Jota. Now, I think it was a tight call between him and Richarlison, but what really swings it in Jota's favour is the fact that he's got Burnley at home this week as a fantastic hopping on point, followed by that double in game week 25. Yes, he blanked in game week 26, but the way my transfers are set out, I will have a plan to probably shift him on by game week 26 anyway. So I think bringing in Diogo Jota is a fairly painless transfer for me to make right now, and I think the upside in the next 2 game weeks is still very much worth it. Richarlison is obviously still a great buy, that's why he's second on my transfer targets, but that lack of a double in game week 25, followed by a blank as well in 26, makes him a slightly more difficult buy for me now than Diogo Jota. There is slightly less upside potential there because of the lack of the double. Now, he's still a very, very good player to be holding on to. As I discussed in my captaincy matrix, he's also a good player that you could be even looking at captaining this game week. So I am very jealous of anyone who's already got him. Moving on, Alfie Doughty is going to be probably building up on the watch list for every single manager at the moment if they don't already have him. Having 2 double game weeks in the next 4 weeks, or next 5 weeks at the moment, and of course Sheffield United at home within that period too, will make Luton assets very, very popular. And if you can bench someone like Doughty in game week 26 and get away with it, he could be a fantastic purchase in game week 24. Moving down the list, I think Ivan Toney and Kevin De Bruyne are also on my transfer targets, but I think if I'm being realistic, they're harder for me to get to at the moment, especially as Aston Villa have gone out of the FA Cup. They will have a game in game week 29, which means selling Ollie Watkins, which would be the player I'd have to sell at the moment because I own both Darwin and Haaland as well. Selling Ollie Watkins for Ivan Toney becomes ever so slightly less appealing, knowing that Watkins is going to be a player that I want anyway in game week 29. Moving on to Kevin De Bruyne, again, if you've got him, you're loving life right now. And if you've got the money and it benefits your team structure, then Kevin De Bruyne is going to be a good buy this week. But in my team, I just can't quite get there without ripping up something else in my 11. And I think it just stretches things a little bit too much with my budget. So I think sadly, as much as I want him, I'm probably going to have to swerve him for the time being. So we've had a look at my transfer targets. Let's have a look at my sell list ahead of game week 24. And unfortunately, Anthony Gordon is currently at the top of it. It's nothing to do with him as a player. He's been fantastic value for money and fantastic in my side for the majority of the season now. However, because he's just nursing that injury, we don't know what his fitness is like at the moment, and he is going to be a doubt for game week 24. I think using that as a reason to get rid of him and fund a move to Diogo Jota is probably quite a sensible one in my team. I've got a pretty strong midfield five. The worst one of those is, or the cheapest one of those is Garnacho. I'm not going to be selling Garnacho this game week because I can't afford to get to Jota from that in one move anyway. Gordon, I can afford to get up to Diogo Jota. And because he might be injured anyway, he'd be a player that maybe I'd be looking at benching anyway this game week. So unfortunately, at the moment, he is top of my sell list. But again, that's nothing against him as a player. And I think if you can hold on to him, I think it's absolutely fine, unless we get concrete news from Eddie Howe that he's definitely out for game week 24 and that injury looks a little bit longer term than we currently think it might be. After that, number 2 would be Estupinian. I'm just a little bit worried about minutes moving forward. I will hold on to him for the time being, hoping that benching against Palace was more of a one-off. But I will be putting him on my bench in game week 24 anyway. So I'm just hoping that it gives me another week's worth of data and I can make a decision on him in the next couple of game weeks rather than making that move just now and hoping that a player with that much attacking upside will come back into the starting 11 and I can rely on him in future game weeks. After that, Pedro Porro, again, another player with great attacking upside, not so good on the clean sheet potential, and that is why he's potentially on my sell list at the moment. Also, not just that, but because there are other defenders that I do like the look of, Alfie Doughty being one of them, but also Man City assets ahead of the double in game week 25. And again, much like Richarlison, he has a blank in game week 26 that I do need to navigate. So selling someone like Porro could be an option just to ensure that I've got one extra starter in game week 26 as well. After that, Bukayo Saka and Cole Palmer. Now, this is going to be very reluctant, and this is why they're at the bottom of my sell list at the moment. But both of these players are players that I probably need to consider selling in the next few game weeks, just because it looks pretty likely, now that Chelsea have beaten Villa in the FA Cup, that this game, Chelsea versus Arsenal in the game week 29 blank, will probably not be going ahead. Now, it could still go ahead if Chelsea get knocked out by Leeds in the next round of the FA Cup, but we'd probably say that they are favourites for that game. They are playing at home to Leeds as well, so it looks pretty likely that we would get that as a blank game week in 29. That makes Saka, Palmer and other Arsenal or Chelsea assets probably relatively sellable in the next few game weeks. I do like them both objectively though, so it would be reluctant, and I think for the time being, unless I see a very particular avenue with either of them concerned that helps me fund a move for another player, I wouldn't want to actively sell them this game week, which is why they're 4th and 5th on my sell list and not a priority as it stands. So that leaves me with one pretty obvious transfer that I want to make as it stands, and that would be moving out the potentially injured Anthony Gordon for Diogo Jota ahead of that Burnley home game and then the double in game week 25. Now, like I said, it's not an easy move because I have really enjoyed owning Gordon and I am reluctant to sell him. I've got value tied up in him. He's obviously been fantastic for me in my team and for his price point this season. And Newcastle do have good fixtures coming. 3 of the next 4 look fantastic and no blank in game week 26. Although it is worth noting that blank in game week 26, they would be playing Arsenal in that anyway. So it's not an ideal game. Now, Diogo Jota blanks in 26, but does have the double before that and Burnley at home. So I think the upside is there, as well as the underlying data would support Diogo Jota as well. So it's a reluctant one, but I think it makes sense for my team, especially as I've got 2 free transfers this week. So before we lock in any moves, let's have a look at my team and how I'm set up ahead of game week 24 as it stands. So here we are, my game week 24 side with the 2 free transfers, 2.4 million in the bank, and I haven't yet made that Diogo Jota move to Anthony Gordon. And it would look really good with him in there. Obviously, it would give me triple Liverpool at home to Burnley. I'd be absolutely delighted with that. I think all 3 of them are still going to be differential enough that I gain really good points from them. And that's another reason that maybe I don't need to do anything too dangerous, too risky, and put the armband on a player from Liverpool who I think are not quite as good options as Haaland is at home to Everton, but I think it is understandable if you think the upside is there. Now, I've also got double Man City, at home to Everton as well, so very happy about that. And in the peripheral of my side, there are some pretty good fixtures going around. I think the West Ham away game for Arsenal, not looking too bad. Porro at home to Brighton, probably not great for a clean sheet, but I think the upside is there, so I don't mind holding him for now. And Crystal Palace away for Parma. Again, Palace have been all at sea recently. Gahey is out of their backline as well, so I expect Chelsea to create chances and hopefully have some joy there, especially, hopefully, in the form of Cole Palmer. Up front, Ollie Watkins will definitely maintain his spot in my starting 11 for the time being. I think if Aston Villa had progressed in the FA Cup last night, I would have probably been looking at selling him maybe in the next couple of game weeks. But as they progressed, I think he's a good hold for the foreseeable future. Outside of that, 3-4-3 looking really good. And it is worth noting that I'm not locked in on the Diogo Jota transfer for the time being. The reason for that is I want to give some thought to bringing in a Luton player this game week. Now, if I brought in Jota for Anthony Gordon, it would only give me 0.2 million spare in the bank to make other moves. It means that I probably couldn't do Kaminsky in for Turner, for example. I wouldn't quite have the funds for that. And I also wouldn't have the funds to bring in Alfie Doughty for most likely Charlie Taylor. Now, they've got a really good fixture this week, Sheffield United at home for Luton, so that is a great hopping on point. So one thing I am potentially considering to give me an extra doubler in Game Week 25 and giving me a good fixture in Game Week 24 as well is potentially pivoting, hoping that Gordon is fit to start against Forest away from home, and if not, Garnacho can come off the bench anyway against Aston Villa away from home. But instead, using my 2 free transfers on selling Turner for Kaminsky, starting Kaminsky against Sheffield United, and selling Saka very reluctantly, but selling Saka because we think he'll get the blank in 29 anyway, and bringing in Diogo Jota for Saka instead, which means that I would have more money to spare to make the Kaminsky move as well. It also means I've got more money spare next week to bolster my side elsewhere as well in Game Week 25, although it would mean that I've got 1 less free transfer to use in Game Week 25 when I really wanted 2 available to be very aggressive either in 25 or 26 ahead of the blank there. So let me know in the comments below which of those 2 options you prefer, whether it's Jota in for Gordon, keep it simple, or is it mix it up a little bit, sell Saka and sell Turner for free, but bring in Kaminsky and Jota, but obviously getting rid of Saka ahead of West Ham and then Burnley is going to be a pretty tough one. So there you have it. That's my Game Week 24 update, and hopefully all of the breaking news was well summarised for you and I explained it well enough. Now, if there are any comments or any questions you had based on the news that broke last night, please do leave them in the comments section below and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. Also, as usual, if you've got any team dilemmas, please do feel free to leave them in the comments well, and I'll get back to you before the Game Week 24 deadline. In the meantime, it would be really fantastic if you could leave the video a like if you've enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel just so you don't miss out on any future content, and it is a great support to me. I'm closing in on 1,000 subscribers. I'd love to hit that number before the season ends, so your support would be really, truly, greatly appreciated. In the meantime though, I wish you all the best ahead of Game Week 24 and I'll see you on the other side as we start preparing for double Game Week 25.